Hello, this is Chuck Ridgway, Automation Technology Manager here at Horner, and thank you for joining us for what will be our last live stream of 2021. And today's topic is Cscape Recipe Management Part 2. And we're excited today, not because it's Part 2 necessarily, but because we're going to give our viewers an opportunity to see a preview of Cscape 10. And joining me today to help me make that happen is my partner in crime, Mr. Casey Gardner. How are we doing today, Casey?
Hey, not too bad. How's it going, Chuck?
It's going great. You know, it seems hard to believe, but this is something like our 55th or so week in a row where we've had Tuesday live streams.
Man, it's really flown by. One thing we'd want to ask people, however, and not that we're missing out on any content. We've got a long list of content we'd like to do, but a lot of the content we've put out through the year has really been helped by either user or customer suggestions. So one thing we'd like anybody watching this is if you have specific suggestions for either content or priority for content you'd like to see in the near future, feel free to send those along and we'll take a look and see what we can do for you.
Yeah, no question. I mean, some of the best topics we had this year were ones that were suggested by customers, for sure. Now, getting back to Cscape 10 and the preview we're going to have a chance to give today, I remember back in November of 2019, so right before COVID, I had the opportunity to travel to Nuremberg, Germany, for the SPS Automation Show. It's probably the biggest automation show in the world these days. And back then, we, for the first time, previewed some of the early features we had planned for Cscape 10. And during that week, those attendees gave us some great feedback. And certainly, one of the features that they were excited by was the early preview we gave them of the Cscape recipe feature. And so today, as part of our preview of Cscape 10 and part of Part 2 of Recipe Management, we're going to show a lot of the refinements that have been made in Cscape 10 as in regards to recipes. And remember, later on in 2022, we'll finally have a chance to release Cscape 10 and release that to the world. If you have any questions, Casey will be manning the chat, so chat those in. He'll either get those answered or save them until the end. If you're watching this on replay, we still want your questions. Just provide those in the comment section and we'll answer those in non-real time. Okay, let's get started. Cscape Recipe Management Part 2. So we'll spend just a couple minutes on a quick review of Part 1. Now, Part 1 was just last week, so we're not going to spend a whole lot of time there. But if you didn't see Part 1, we'd encourage you to go back and view it. But you don't necessarily need to stop watching this video. We'll give you a quick catch-up over a couple slides. But we're going to spend a bulk of our time talking about Cscape 10 recipes. We're going to talk about improvements that have been made in the recipe editor, as well as a lot of improvements that have been made in the recipe graphical object. And of course, like we like to do on these Tuesday live streams, we'll work live with both Cscape and the OCS hardware and give you a sneak peek of how that new recipe capability works. One other thing I will note, and if you're thinking that, wait a minute, you just showed me recipe capability last week for 9.9, now Cscape 10 will be coming out. It's going to obsolete 9.9's capability. That's not the case. Cscape 10 builds upon the current recipe capability, so everything you learned about recipes last week is perfectly applicable moving forward. Okay, let's dive right in. So, quick review. The Cscape recipe editor, that's where a bulk of the setup for the recipe functionality is made in Cscape. And keep in mind that the recipe editor is a tool which allows process recipes to be represented as a spreadsheet with ingredients and products in rows and columns. And each ingredient is a process variable, like a temperature set point, a pressure set point, maybe a material quantity, those sorts of things. Each product is the result of running the process with a unique combination of set points for each process variable. And then the spreadsheet that you're effectively setting up or using in the recipe editor ultimately is a CSV file that resides on the micro SD card at runtime. So on the machine, when you want to run a new product, effectively you're going to be loading a recipe from the memory card from that CSV file, and the machine will run that to produce the product. Now, one of the things we showed you last week was the recipe object that's built into the graphical capability of the OCS, built into Cscape, of course. The current graphical object is a configurable set of buttons, effectively. And those buttons allow you to view, load, edit, and save recipes. Okay, and in addition to utilizing the recipe object through those 4 buttons, you also will typically utilize the standard numeric data objects to display or edit the current ingredient values that are loaded or running on the machine. So when you're talking about setting up the user interface in Cscape 9.9 for recipe functionality, you're talking about using the recipe buttons, and you're talking about using just standard numeric data objects. Now, you've also got function blocks in Ladder that we reviewed last week. These allow you to set up your OCS to automatically load recipes. Let's say that you don't want the operator necessarily to trigger the load, but you want the equipment itself to automatically, or the OCS itself to automatically load a recipe, maybe when it receives, an instruction from a MRP system or from a SCADA system or something like that. And then maybe if the OCS is kind of tweaking a bit the process parameters as it runs the product, we also have a save recipe function block that can be used to automatically save those changes away. So again, in addition to the tools for the user interface, we've also got tools for function blocks. And then to kind of cover the highlights for the workflow for the recipe functionality in Cscape, let's do this slide here. So keep in mind that when you add recipe capability to an OCS application, you're typically doing that at the very end of your application development. So for instance, the code is already written, you've got the screens mostly created, the machine is running and working, you just want to add recipe capability so that you can very easily manage the production of multiple products. So you're going to start with either an Excel spreadsheet that you create that includes products and ingredients along with their values, or for a lot of you, you'll just go ahead and start in the Cscape recipe editor, where by setting that up, you can effectively create that spreadsheet from scratch. Now, once you're in the Cscape recipe editor, either after importing your own spreadsheet or building one from scratch using that tool, you're going to tie each ingredient to a process variable. Next, after wrapping up the recipe editing in Cscape, now you're going to have to decide, how do I want recipes to be loaded when I'm going to run a new product? Do I want it to be triggered by an operator, or do I want it to be triggered automatically in logic by the OCS itself, or some combination thereof? Well, to have an operator be able to load in a recipe, you're going to need to create a user interface for that operator. And that again is going to include recipe buttons as well as just standard data objects. Now, if you want automatic loading of recipes and saving of recipes, of course, that means writing logic using the recipe function blocks. And then once you're done with the setup, both on the screen as well as in logic, next, you just want to make sure that that CSV recipe spreadsheet file that you created in step 1, that it ends up on the micro SD card so the OCS can use it at runtime. And that means either set up Cscape to download that spreadsheet automatically at download time, or just manually copy it over yourself using manual file copy type tools. So that concludes our quick review of last week. For more details, don't hesitate to pull up last week's video and dive through it. All right, now let's move on to the sneak peek of Cscape 10 recipes. Before we dive into recipes specifically, let's talk a little bit about Cscape 10. What is Cscape 10? Well, Cscape 10 is the next major release of Cscape, which has been years in the making. We've put a lot of great features into it. There's still a fair amount of work left to be done. Okay, we plan on releasing Cscape 10 in the summer of 2022, and we're still on track for that. Now, Cscape 10 offers major advancements in the user environment and in graphics. And the recipe object is included in graphics. Now, a lot of the features we planned on including in Cscape 10, like improvements to advanced ladder variable-based, or our IEC 1131 languages, we've already actually released those as part of Cscape 9.9. So a lot of the work we've been doing, we've actually got it released to the field already. But the graphics and the user enhancements, those are coming in Cscape 10. Now you'll be able to use Cscape 10 with any current OCS model. However, especially for the graphical enhancements, you're going to need a new OCS model to take advantage of all those graphical enhancements, and we'll release those new models concurrently with Cscape 10 in the summer. Okay, so that's a quick preview of what Cscape 10 is all about. Now let's dive right into those recipes. The primary enhancement in Cscape 10 when it comes to recipes is a new and improved graphical recipe object. Now, I just said a few minutes ago that you didn't waste your time last week by viewing our part 1 of this series, which covered how recipes are handled in 9.9, because Cscape 10 builds upon 9.9. Now, in 9.9, the graphical recipe object is really, as I've mentioned, a collection of configurable buttons: load, edit, save, etc. Okay? And you'll take those along with regular old data objects and build your own user interface from scratch so the operator can manage recipes. Now in Cscape 10, we have a new graphical recipe object, which is a single advanced object, highly configurable, that offers a great feature-rich user experience at runtime. So that's really the major improvement in Cscape 10, is that Cscape 10 graphical recipe object. All right, let's take a look at some of those new enhancements. So on the left side of the object, you've got a product list. So those are all the different products that the operator can choose from when they want to load a new recipe or load a new product. Okay, and you can scroll up and down if you have more products available than what will fit vertically in the object. At the top right-hand corner, you'll see the current selected object has a window where it's also displayed. On the right side, kind of in the middle there, you'll see ingredients. So all your ingredients are listed in a columnar fashion. And again, if there's more ingredients than will fit in the space allotted, you can scroll left to right to go through your different ingredients. And in the bottom right-hand side there, that's where you've got built-in control buttons. Let's cover each of these in turn. All right, let's start by talking in a little more detail about ingredients. Now, we've added some additional features to what you can display along with your ingredients. So, of course, you've got your ingredient name, as well as its current value, both numerically, if it's a numeric type value, as well as engineering units. We've also provided the ability for you to include a graphic thumbnail, if you choose, for each of your ingredients. That can help make the experience for the user better and allow them to kind of see graphically what we're talking about or what you're talking about in terms of that particular ingredient. As I just mentioned a minute ago, if you have more ingredients left to right than will fit in the space allotted, you can scroll back and forth just using your finger across the list of available ingredients. So as you can see, we've added some nice capabilities to the display and editing of ingredients. Next, let's take a look at products. Along the left there, that's where we have the product list, which can scroll up and down just using your finger as needed. And then the selected product is also displayed in a product window in the upper right-hand side there. Now, the product list is optional. So in other words, if you don't have a lot of space to have a list of all the products, or at least a list of some of the products along the left there, and you prefer just to have the operator select the particular product from the product window, you can omit the product list. Okay, now let's talk about the control buttons that are available for the recipe object in Cscape 10. Now, one of the things that's exciting that I think is a great feature is the fact that we have omitted textual descriptions in the button. So everything is an icon. And that works really well typically as long as the users understand what the icons mean. So in addition to trying to select really meaningful icons, we've also added an operator help button. And I'll show you how that works at runtime so you can see how the operator, whether he's a new operator or just one that hasn't used the equipment for a while, if the operator has any uncertainty at all about what button does what, he can use that help button to answer that question and make sure there's no uncertainty whatsoever. So you've got a help button available on the right-hand side. Now, you can open a new recipe file if you wish. Now, that's probably the button that would be the most likely to be omitted. Keep in mind, when you configure the recipe object, you're going to have the ability to omit any of these buttons that you don't want. But anyway, you have the ability to open up a new recipe file, so that's one of the buttons that is available. The ones that are going to be used the most, or probably the one that'll be used the most, is the Load Selected Product button. And you can see that's kind of the down arrow type button there. All right, so if you want to load the recipe for a new product, that's the button you're going to press. If you just want to view a particular product, then you've also got a View button. We also give you the ability, if you want to allow operators to have it, so that operators can either add or duplicate an existing product, or that they can delete an existing product. The delete button is probably the most dangerous, so that's one that you have to use the most care with. But keep in mind, Cscape does have user access capability, so you can make the user log in to a higher access level in order to actually utilize the recipe object, which would keep really unauthorized folks out of the object. And then finally, if you're going to tweak a particular recipe, let's say that you are wanting to add a little bit of time or maybe add a little bit of material to a particular product recipe through changing one or more of the ingredients, and you've made those changes and you want to save those changes away so the next time you run this product, those changes remain, well, we've also got a Save Changes to Select Product button. Now, in terms of the recipe editor dialog box itself in Cscape 10, that hasn't changed much. Okay, it was highly functional in 9.9. We covered it in a lot of detail last week. It still remains highly functional. The main thing that was added, as you can see here, is the ability to add a graphic thumbnail for your products or your ingredients or both. And then finally, the dialog box that allows you to configure your recipe object allows you to tie that object to, of course, a specific recipe. It allows you to decide if you want to include that product list that's on the left-hand side or not. It gives you the ability to configure the width of the column where your ingredients are housed. And don't worry, you can always make your ingredients wider column-wise, even if you don't have enough room to fit all your ingredients without scrolling, because you can scroll left to right through your ingredients at runtime. And then, of course, at the bottom, you've got the list of all those operator buttons that you can decide to include or not to include. So that's a look at least from a summary standpoint, that's a look at the Cscape 10 recipe capability. All right, next let's go ahead and fire up Cscape and show you how it's done real time with the software. So what we've got here is a early version of Cscape 10. Okay, so it's a beta version that we've been working with internally here. And you'll see a lot of things are different, but again, today we're mainly highlighting the capabilities of the recipe object. So I've got a screen here with my recipe object already configured. It also includes some standard numeric data objects, so I can view on the screen the particular parameters that are currently loaded in the machine. Okay, and I've got things like just text across the top, a jump button, that sort of thing. Now again, like I told you last week, whenever you're talking about recipe setup or recipe workflow, you're either going to start from a spreadsheet that lists your ingredients in your products, or you're just going to dive right into the Cscape recipe editor. And in Cscape 10, that recipe editor is accessed right here. Okay, as you can see, it looks really just about the same as it does in 9.9, just with the added capability of adding graphics to your ingredients and also to your products. Now we'll start by looking at the ingredients first. And really the only differences between 9.9 and 10 is this thumbnail graphic, as well as the ability to determine the style of editing object that you want your operator to be able to manipulate. So if you want them to be able to change the values using a numeric keypad, you can select numeric keypad. If you want them to use a spinner object instead, you can select spinner. It happens to be grayed out here, but it will be available once Cscape 10 is launched. Okay? So this is very much similar to what you saw last week. Now, one thing I will mention here, this particular demo was written using register-based advanced ladder. I've pretty much switched completely over to variable-based advanced ladder. And if this was created in variable-based advanced ladder, instead of a register number here, you would see a variable that was tied to this particular ingredient. Okay, otherwise it's the same. So each individual ingredient is tied to a specific process variable. And then over here, for your product configuration, here's where you configure the name as well as a thumbnail graphic if you want to use that. And that's really the added feature in 10 with this setup process. Everything else is the same. So for all the other details, you can look at last week's video. All right, so once you've done all your setup using the Cscape recipe editor, then it's a matter of determining, okay, how am I going to load recipes, manage recipes, etc.? Am I going to do it with an operator or with logic or both? And again, with Cscape 10, you've got a real rich recipe object that you can use to make the experience great for the operator. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just highlight some of the things on here. This particular recipe object was created with the product list. Okay, so this product list here on the left, and that is optional. And I'll show you another one that was created without that product list and what it looks like. Here's where you can configure the width of your ingredient columns. And keep in mind, if you have more ingredients than will fit in the space allotted, you can scroll left and right through the ingredients if necessary. Okay, the operator can for sure. All right, so this is where you adjust in terms of pixels how wide each ingredient column is. And then down here, this is where you determine which of these buttons is going to be present in your particular application. The only one that you can't disable is the help button. I believe that one has to be there every time. And then everything that a standard graphical object has in terms of attributes, access level, legend, etc., is available here at the bottom of the dialog box. All right, let's go ahead and show you now another screen with another recipe object on it, but this one doesn't actually have the product list included. So you can see what that looks like here. So it's set up really the same way. The only difference is this show product list option was unchecked. Therefore, you don't take up any space object-wise for the product list. You simply have the product selection made here in this section of the object at runtime. Okay, enough Cscape. That's what it looks like from a setup standpoint. Let's take a look at what it looks like running on an OCS. So here's my OCS running the recipe capability for Cscape 10. Okay, so there's a couple things that are different with the object at runtime than necessarily what you see in the preview in Cscape. The first thing is you do have the ability to notice or to see specifically which of your products is actually running on the machine. And you can do that through the icon right here that indicates that even though Cafe Mocha may be highlighted or selected, Espresso is actually the product that's currently loaded. Okay, that icon mimics the load icon. So as you can see, as we select different products, this area up here indicates the product that's selected, not what's loaded, but what's selected. So if let's say we want to load the recipe for black coffee, I first need to highlight black coffee as I've done here. Then I need to press the load button. Well, let's say that I don't remember what the load button is. And what I would like to do instead is use the help button to refresh my memory. I can go ahead and press the load button, and it shows every time I press it the functionality of each button. Very handy. And I can go through each button in turn, and then when I'm done with that help, if you will, after a few seconds, that goes away. All right, so now I know that I need to select black coffee, and I know that this is the load button. Another nice thing about the object is that it gives us a "Are you sure?" pop-up box. I can say OK, and now the parameters have been loaded for black coffee. Okay. Now let's take a look at what this object looks like if we don't have a product list. How does it vary in terms of how it operates? So I'm going to jump to a different screen that has a recipe object that does not have a product list. So in that case, I can still select my product. I just use this tool instead. So if I want to, as you can see here, black coffee is currently running. If I want to select a different product, I just press the arrows here, and let's say Cafe Mocha is what I want. So I select that there, and again, press the load button. Okay, so again, you have the choice stylistically whether to allocate space for a product list or not. All right, let's head back to our other recipe page. Now let's take a look at how we might add a product. So as you can see here, or it may not be obvious, but we actually have 4 products available here, and that's all: cappuccino, black coffee, espresso, and cafe mocha. Let's say we want to add white coffee instead, which is just black coffee with a bit of milk. Well, what we want to do then is we want to highlight the product that we want to copy. Okay, so we select it there. Next, we're going to press the Add Product button, which is this button here. And again, if we weren't sure, we could use the Help button. Now, what you should have noticed there is that now that we have added a 5th product, this arrow has shown up to indicate that there's more products available at the bottom of our list. So I can scroll up, and now you can see there's a black coffee copy that's been created. Well, I don't want it to be named black coffee copy. I want it to be named white coffee. So how can we rename it? Well, that's where we can use this function right here. By pressing the product display area, I can now rename it. So let's rename it. Okay, so now I've renamed my recipe. Now you notice I can't change the graphic, so that's one thing that is a limitation. You might want to have like a generic graphic for a field created recipe or something. But what I can do now, since I've copied the black coffee recipe, is I can change that recipe to make it white coffee, which is what I'm trying to create in the first place. So let's go ahead and add a bit of milk. So I'm changing that from 0 milliliters. Let's say we're changing that to 20 milliliters. Okay, now I have changed that, but I haven't saved it away. So if I were to leave this recipe or load in a different product and then come back again to white coffee, it would go back to 0 milliliters of milk. So I really need to save this away. So to save this away, I need to use the Save button, and that's that button right here. It's basically saying, hey, do you want to save this recipe away to the coffee recipe spreadsheet? I say okay. And now I have added white coffee to my list. So if I load espresso, let's do black coffee instead. I'll go ahead and load black coffee. Okay. No milk. And then let's go ahead and scroll down and load white coffee. You can see our milk is in there because I saved it away. Okay, so that is a preview of the Cscape 10 recipe functionality, both in Cscape and at runtime. And I think you'll find that it's a pretty feature-rich user experience for operators who are looking to utilize recipe capability so that they can load and save away recipes as they're authorized to do so. And you have options. So if you don't have a lot of space, you can omit the product list if that really isn't applicable to your application. And then users can just select the product from here. And again, if I had more ingredients than what would fit on the screen, I could scroll right and scroll left to expose all the ingredients. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and bring in Mr. Casey Gardner again. So there we have it, Casey. Thank you for giving me that little hint there about my transition that I missed. Any questions today on the Cscape recipe management?
No questions today, unfortunately.
That's okay. It is a time of year when people are vacationing and spending time with family for sure. Now, next week, you will see us release the list of videos or live streams for January. The first video in January, we're going to take a look back at 2021 and kind of summarize for you the different content that we created during our Tuesday live streams, so that for those of you who are kind of new to this material, you can see what's available out there for you to peruse in 2022. Okay, if you have questions and you're watching this on replay, don't forget, give us those questions in the comment section. Casey, have a great new year, and I'll see you next week. Okay, let me give you a couple reminders. First reminder is that every Tuesday we're here at 2 o'clock Eastern. You can watch live, where you can ask questions live as well, or you can watch on replay. Also, don't forget, as I've just mentioned, we'll announce the January live events early next week, so keep an eye out for that information. You can check our website. You can also check the Horner newsletter that we send out early every month. And then finally, I want to make one last reminder, and that is we've had tremendous growth this year in our subscription list and our number of subscribers. So if you haven't subscribed yet, don't hesitate to do so. It doesn't cost anything. And if you subscribe and choose notifications, you'll be notified every time we go live or every time we release a new video on our YouTube channel. So as we finish up 2021, I want to wish everyone a happy new year, and we'll see you next week. Stay safe out there.